Who made you? Oh, come on now, those of you that were here last week. You can do better than that. Who made you? God made me, yeah, okay. Now this is the tough one. And why did God make you? We got some work to do with this crowd, I think. Let's try it together. To know him and love him and serve him. Let's just do that again. To know him, to love him and serve him in this life, and to be happy with him in the next, and to be happy with him in the next. To know him, to love him, to serve him in this life, and to be happy with him in the next. That's why God made us. Next week, we'll do it again, and hopefully you'll do a little bit better. Those simple questions and their answers point us to the reality that God has a plan. God has a plan for us as his people. God has a plan for us as a church community, as a parish community. And the plan that God has for us is rooted in the reality of the cross of Jesus Christ. Indeed, the cross of Jesus Christ is our trademark, our brand, our tattoo. It's what we wear, it's who we are. It's what we hold to be most important because of our faith in Jesus Christ. St. Paul even reminds us in the second reading, for in him and through him, to reconcile all things for him, making peace by the blood of his cross. I asked you last week to consider it from the perspective of a journey, a bus trip. You're on a bus. This is our bus, and because we're in a bus and on a journey, we're on the move because, well, we're a movement. We're not a monument. And we have to move. If we want to survive, if we want to flourish, if we want to grow, we have to keep moving. We can't stand still, for to stand still is really to die. We must be willing to share the reality of the cross. In fact, that willingness is not just something that's optional, it is indeed a requirement on this bus. On this bus, we are all called to evangelize, to share this good news of the cross of Jesus Christ. It's really not a difficult task, you know. In fact, frankly, it's quite simple. It just requires a willingness to do three things. To first pray. It's something that everyone can do, pray. Pray for others especially, and pray for others by name, but not just telling them, I'm going to pray for you, but saying, how can I pray for you? How can I pray for you? Opens up a conversation that allows you to talk about your faith. How can I pray for you? The second thing is to invite. Invite your friends, your relatives, your neighbors, especially those who are having a difficult time, those who are challenged by whatever it could be, to come and worship, especially here in this place. And that is a simple thing to do. You should come to church with me. You might find some comfort, because here's what I get out of going to church. And then the third thing is to welcome. Especially welcome those that are around you when you come into church. And as you're leaving, welcome them. You're always welcome here. It's God's house. You're welcome in God's house. Welcome those and show that welcoming, maybe not so much you have to worry about it at this Mass yet, but by making space for people who come in behind you and after you. That's the first task, that evangelization. Those three simple things. The second task, which I want to talk about tonight for all those who wish to be on this bus, is a willingness to become a deliberate disciple. Deliberate disciples do the kinds of things, or really ask the kind of questions that the scholar of the law asked Jesus when he said to him, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" It's really a very fair question. And I think any one of us, given the opportunity, might indeed ask Jesus that very same question. What must I do? How do I become an intentional disciple? And of course, Jesus tells the wonderful story of the Good Samaritan, and it is a story of a disciple. I'll get to it in a moment, but I want to start really with the flip side of that coin, the other two fellows in the story. Because what Jesus is comparing the Samaritan against as a disciple is the consumers. He's showing us really what not to do. You see, because this priest and the Levite, they ignored the needs of this victim of robbers. They really didn't care about him because they only cared about themselves and what they wanted and how they thought things should be. Consumerism is a really dangerous pitfall in the life of the church and religious people. And when I use that term religious people, I'm speaking not so much about priests and nuns, that kind of religious, but religious people, the kind of people who think that if I just say my prayers exactly the right way, everything will be fine. If I do it just exactly in a particular kind of method, God will hear me. That kind of religious people who take on a consumer attitude about church, the kind of attitude that says, I'm not going to get my hands dirty. Please, Father, don't ask me to do anything more. Besides, Father, isn't it enough that I come to church? What more do you expect of me? It's a consumer mentality. Consumer mentality is, Father, please don't ask me to move over. I'm not going to do it. Consumer mentality. This bus is no place for consumers. This bus is a place for those wishing and wanting and willing to become, and those who are intentional disciples. You've heard me use that word, I think maybe just once or twice, that phrase, I should say, intentional disciples. Have you ever heard me say that before? No? I know some of you are kind of new to the parish and maybe you haven't heard me say it before, but it's an important word, and I repeat it time and again, not because I like to say it all the time, but because it's important. In fact, it's very important. Some of you might recall back in Lent of 2015, a year and a half or so ago, I did a whole series on how to become an intentional disciple. And I spoke about the 5 thresholds, or the 5 steps of what does it take to be an intentional disciple. The first step is to find someone that you can trust. And you can trust, you might be surprised. I mean, think about it. The Samaritan, who would have thought that they could have trusted a Samaritan? And yet he was the one that was really the trustworthy one in the gospel. The least likely of persons. Who can you trust? Find someone that you can trust, that you can talk to. Someone who has faith, and you look at that person and you say, Because that leads to the next step, a sense of curiosity. When you can find some trust, there's a bit of curiosity that raises. Why does this person do that? There's questions that come up. What do you mean have a personal relationship with God? What does that mean? And what's going on here? And maybe, Father, what the heck are you talking about? It just doesn't make too much sense to me. I don't quite get what you're saying. What's God doing here? Those are questions that come up on this journey. And they don't necessarily have to be answered, but they certainly do have to be asked. Because it brings up the third threshold, which is simply an openness to the idea that change is possible. There's that C word that everyone loves and adores, right? Change. Don't we all love change? Yeah. Well, I didn't ask you to change. I just said to be open to the possibility of change, to be open to the idea that change is possible. Because the reality is that if I'm going to be able to deal with all this stuff that's going on, if I'm going to see God working in my life in a way that I may never have seen it before, maybe I need to change. Maybe. And of course, that does lead to the fourth step, the fourth threshold in this process of becoming an intentional disciple, which is really seeking the answer to the questions that we have. And that might mean looking in places where we might not think to look. Look in places where God's working that, well, it might not be a place that I would have ever gone to before. I like to sometimes think of it this way, God comes to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comforted. Think about it. Find God in ways that you might never think you found him there before. That really leads us then to the final step in becoming a deliberate, intentional disciple, and it starts with this response to this calling, this invitation to deliberate discipleship. And it's really meant to create a spiritual environment, an attitude, a way of life, not just here in church, but in your homes and even in your places of work, in school, where you recognize and openly talk about and honor the sacraments and the liturgy and all that we believe as Catholics. Jesus really urges us as his disciples to build a community that fosters more disciples. In fact, encouraging all of the baptized to bear fruit. What we do here indeed is structured to help all of those who are baptized to become open to and receive God's grace in all its fullness. Deliberate disciples live a grace-filled life, and every Catholic should want to live a grace-filled life. That's exactly what the Samaritan in the gospel is doing. Unlike the priest, unlike the Levite, even unlike the scholar of the law who was trying to test Jesus, the Samaritan was a deliberate disciple while the others were consumers. The deliberate disciple, the Samaritan, was the one whom was moved with compassion at the sight, and he approached this victim and poured oil and wine over his wounds and bandaged him. So that's what deliberate, intentional disciples do. They care for other people. And they show that care in their actions no matter what happens, no matter what the circumstances. Intentional, deliberate disciples take the message that they learn, the message of the gospel, and put it into practice in their day-to-day lives. Deliberate disciples, intentional disciples, always seek the good of the other, because deliberate, intentional disciples always look for ways to love. And sometimes that means difficult things. And those of you who are parents, isn't it true that the good that you give to your children is often in the form of discipline? And isn't discipline often difficult? Sure. Because love isn't always the easiest thing in the world. It takes a willingness and an openness to look at the possibilities and to seek opportunities, because they come in all kinds of ways, and sometimes even the least expected of ways. I mean, certainly the Samaritan was not out to find and look for a wounded person on the side of the road, but there he was, and he stopped and did what he had to do. He acted. And in that action, he shows his willingness to love, to know, and to serve God. He's worthy of the trademark, the tattoo, the brand that is the cross. He's living the cross even before the cross ever happened. You see, in order to become that kind of disciple, intentional and deliberate, something that everyone who's on this bus must be willing to strive for, there must be a willingness to know and to love and to serve God. We must be willing to be marked with the sign of the cross. Maybe you're not convinced of that. And that's okay. At least give me till next week to help convince you a little bit more. But maybe you're struggling with this idea of becoming an intentional disciple, and that's okay. And maybe that's not something that you want to do, and you're just happy to come to church and that's enough. There are other buses where you can do just that, where you won't be asked to be an intentional disciple, where you won't be asked to evangelize. There are buses indeed that don't require this trademark, this brand, this tattoo that is the cross. But if you're still wondering and questioning and thinking, that's good. That's good. If you picked up that book last week, Rediscover Jesus, read it. Keep reading it. If you're waiting to make sure that this is what you want to do, that's good too. Wait till next week and pick one up then. There's plenty of them in the back. If you didn't take one last week, you can take one this week. But if you choose not to be on this bus, remember the words of the song. God will save Zion and rebuild the city of Judah. The descendants of his servants shall inherit it, and those who love his name shall inhabit it. And you see, that's the promise that God has in mind for each and every one of us, for all of you. If we choose the trademark, the brand, the tattoo that is the cross of Jesus Christ.